Welcome to the March 27th meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I'll call the meeting to order. And for the agenda tonight, Rodney hopes to be here for a discussion item later on. So I'd ask that we move item 8, which is the discussion on board policy BDDH, to our last discussion item. So hopefully Rodney can attend.
We approve the agenda as amended.
Second. Moved by Franson, second by Rasmussen. Discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Passes 5-1. Director Franson, would you please read the mission statement?
The mission of the Ames Community Schools is to ensure that all learners develop the knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and personal esteem necessary to grow in and shape a changing society.
Thank you. Our first item tonight is a public hearing on the Ames Middle School stadium improvements. I'll open the public forum. We have no one wishing to speak. Any comments to the office? No? All right, I'll close the public forum and take a motion.
Move the board award the contract for the middle school stadium improvements project to Woodruff Construction LLC in the amount of $1,028,831 for the base bid and alternates 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Second.
Moved by Esposito, second by Franson. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 4 is the next public hearing on the Northwood site improvements. Open the public forum, and no one wishes to speak. So any other comments to the district?
None.
All right, I'll close the public forum and take a motion.
I move the board approve the contract for the Northwood Preschool Center site improvements project to Caliber Concrete LLC in the amount of $381,191 for base bid and alternates 1 and 2.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Esposito. Discussion. All right, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. And our public hearing on the demolition of Old Edwards has been canceled. So moving on to our public forum. I did send the board a statement I prepared. We've received quite a bit of feedback on the resolution that Board Member Rosser proposed. So I was going to read this first before we go to the public forum. There's been significant community interest in the resolution Board Member Rosser proposed to the school board on February 13th regarding immigration status of students and staff and potential interactions with law enforcement officials. There was consensus among board members, supported by district administration, to review the resolution at a subsequent board policy committee meeting. The overarching purpose of the review is to make sure that district policies and procedures protect our students and staff's rights while maintaining a positive educational environment that at all times adheres to federal and state laws. The school board is a nonpartisan body whose purpose is to maintain policies that allow all students to receive the highest quality of education available. The proposed resolution does not establish any policy and can be construed as a political statement to establish a sanctuary status. It is more important for our students, staff, and parents to understand approved district policies should provide assurances on the way in which the school district will interact with law enforcement officials while maintaining respect for all. Later on in our meeting tonight, Dr. Taylor would be providing a draft policy to the board. The draft policy will be reviewed by our board policy committee with the intention of formal discussion by the entire school board on April 10th and action on a proposed policy on April 24th. I feel development of a policy is the appropriate way this governing body should address the relevant issue. The Ames community will always be an organization that values diversity. In my experience, this diversity is a strength of our school system, which is manifested daily in positive interactions of students and staff. The district's You Belong Here statement provided on January 31st was a wonderful testament to our values as an organization and the larger community. So with that, we'll move to the public forum. We have no one wishing to speak tonight.
Luke, I'd like to address your comments real quick before we move on to that, if you don't mind.
If we could wait till the discussion item later on, that'd be good. Wait.
No, I'd rather make the comments now since you just did it right You made the comment.
We're going to
now.
move, Louis, we're going to
And it
move on to the
wasn't- And
first.
it wasn't noted on the agenda, so why don't you just,
Moving on to our first
Give me-
discussion item.
okay.
Mr. Flynn and fans, come on up. This is a presentation by the Meeker staff, and this is Mr. Flynn and three of his staff members. Carl's going to try and help get this set up here a little bit. But Meeker, as part of their school improvement plan for 2016-17, thank you, Carl, adopted a program called CARES, and I think the board has some information relative to that particular program. It's really kind of an offshoot of what we call responsive classroom, and for those in the audience who are curious, every morning in our buildings we go with responsive classroom, and it's really an activity where students are getting to know each other and sharing. It's really quite a sight to see overall. But the CARES program, which is being adopted at Meeker, is a little modification upon the responsive classroom, and I will let Mr. Flynn take over.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Steve Flynn. I'm the principal at Meeker Elementary. I have Julie Foley with me. She's a success teacher and a member of our leadership team. This is Karen Klotzbach. She's our instructional coach and a member of the leadership team. And this is Terry Prohaska. She's a kindergarten teacher and a member of the leadership team, and they're all going to speak in just a minute. Carrie Deal, our guidance counselor, helped a lot with this presentation, and she wasn't able to be here tonight. But as Tim said, we're focusing on Meeker CARES this year. And CARES stands for cooperation, assertion, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. And our CARES journey kind of started last spring when we had a reflective conversation. We called it the whiteboard conversation. At the end of last year, we were meeting as a staff, and we said what went well this year, and we put a lot of stuff on a whiteboard. And then we kind of drew a line and said, what could we improve on for next year? And we started writing things down. And we had, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but we had a lot of stuff down there that was related to behavior. Transitions as we moved down the hallway, recess and breakfast and things like that. And the leadership team met many times over the summer to talk about this, and this really informed our work. We talked about what can we do to make this better. So we kind of decided to return to responsive classroom, which is something we've been trained on for the past 6 or 7 years, I believe. And one of the things that's in responsive classroom is CARES. So we really dug into that to address what the staff thought we needed to do to improve. And we decided we really needed to develop a culture of kind of who we are at Meeker School. So that's what we set out to do. And Meeker CARES, as I said, cooperation, assertion, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. And what's being posted now is the poster that we kind of made that was kid-friendly, so the kids would understand what that means. And we also sent this home to parents so that they would see it. Cooperation means working smoothly with others. Assertion, standing up for yourself and asking for help when you need it. Responsibility is being dependable and doing the things you need to do. Empathy is caring about how your words and actions affect other people. And self-control is thinking before you act. And we made a really conscious effort to start using these words when we talk to kids, both teaching them proactively and then those little problem-solving conferences when a student has made a choice that we're not wild about. We pull them out in the hall and talk to them a little bit. I found myself this year talking about self-control a lot in the hallway, or empathy. You know, when you did that, how do you think that made her feel? That kind of stuff. So really trying to use this language as much and as often as we possibly can. And then we had an assembly, a kind of a school expectations assembly, and we made Meeker CARES posters for all the different common areas. So we covered what it looks like to be responsible in the restroom, and what it looks like to show cooperation in the lunchroom, and what it looks like to show self-control in the art room, for example, the posters that we're showing. So we covered those all at the expectations assembly and talked about how we're going to treat each other everywhere we go, building-wide at Meeker. And then the teachers were given an assignment by grade level, by team, to develop a 6-week plan. of how they were going to roll out Meeker Cares and teach it to the kids. And each team was going to do something different, and I'm going to let the teachers kind of talk about what that looked like at the different grade levels. So we'll start with Terry.
The first thing we did as a team was get together in our PLC and created some lesson plans and identified resources that we had available to us within our grade level that we could share between ourselves, other teams in our hallway, things like that. And most of the teachers decided it made sense. We wanted to spend about 6 weeks on it. There's 5 letters in CARE. So we did about 1 letter a week. And we used a lot of the same strategies of the things that we've practiced in Ames and learned about for teaching our academics. The same types of things we do using read-alouds, explicit teaching, a lot of modeling and practice. But when you get into behavior, you get to do a lot more fun stuff with role-playing, games and activities as well, that lend themselves to the practice opportunities that you need because you are teaching behaviors. And you can see on the posters, we also write, with our academic standards, we write I can statements so the students know exactly what they're expected to learn at the end of your unit of what you're doing. And when you're teaching behavior, it's an I will statement so that they know what they will be expected to do. And it really helps them define those 5 letters in kid-friendly language so they understand more of what's expected from them. And after all of those 5 traits have been taught and you've had time to reflect through them, you can see like this one, we did our I will statements, and then the kids all, at the end of the week, day 5, we all sign the poster and, you know, make a little contract for what we're gonna do. But after teaching those 5 things, and then kind of on the 6th week, you spend some time building up your classroom rules and what those look like, because they have learned all of these behavior expectations. They really own into what the classroom rules are, and they have a better understanding of the why these behaviors are important, not just my teacher's telling me to, or I'm doing it to please them, but why is this important for our learning environment, and why it makes Meeker a better place for everybody to be. So we will keep these anchor charts posted in our rooms pretty much throughout the entire year. We reflect on them continuously, relearning, reteaching as we need to, and the kids can also look at them, and it helps them reflect on their behavior, the behavior of their classmates, and they're really good at holding each other accountable for maintaining that positive behavior within our school.
So I'd like to speak a little bit on behalf of the 5th grade teachers at Meeker. You're going to hear some similarities in terms of what the 5th grade team did, a lot of connections to what I heard Terry say. But the 5th grade team started with a strong literature connection, and so they were introducing the 5 components of CARES through literature, and in order to create a common understanding in terms of what each of those components means. So as the teachers and students read literature, they were really focusing in on the characters and what they noticed the characters said and did. And then from there, they created Y charts, how it looks, from that character standpoint when they were showing self-control from how it looks, how it sounds, and how it feels. And so they created a series of Y charts. And then they went on and decided, well, how does this look for us? What's the reality part for us and who we are at Meeker School? And so they determined through that, they had a series of, like you were talking about, activities and role-playing where they really brought the components of CARES to life and practiced what it looks like at Meeker School on a day-to-day basis. So some of the role-playing situations they had were some of the very situations that pop up on a day-to-day basis at school. So not only did they learn about the components of CARES, but they also, it was a way for them to build the culture in their classroom and to really get the idea that we are a team, we're in this together, and that our actions affect those around us. And from there then, the culminating part, similar to what Terry said, they generated together, had a team meeting and generated their class rules. And you can see the slide on the screen there. They chose to establish a rule around each of the 5 components of CARES, and then they pushed it even further and took a look at some of those potential consequences around each of those components as well. And again, you'll see this poster continuing to hang in their classrooms for those teachable moments when children need reminders and redirections around behavior choices, but also to reinforce the desirable behaviors as well.
So in addition to the proactive teaching of these things, we also decided we wanted to put in a closing circle. We've had a morning meeting now for a long time, and a morning meeting is what you think it is. We get the kids together to start the day, and there's a greeting and an activity, some sharing, and we just look each other in the eye and say each other's name and say welcome to school, and we're going to have some fun together. At the end of the day now, we've put in closing circle, which is a time to look back on the day and reflect, and we specifically said we want to use that closing circle as often as we can to reflect on how we did with Meeker Cares, and Julie's going to talk about that.
So teachers can pull their students together at the end of the day, and typically the teachers in the morning say, think about how you can show self-control throughout the day, so you can talk about it at the end of the day and reflect on it. So here's a classroom at the end of the day, and the teacher's just asking, how are you showing cares today? How are you showing cooperation? Or how did you? And kids will raise their hands and give examples. And sometimes their example covers many of the different letters for cares. And if this happens throughout the day too, as teachers are walking down the hallway saying to their students, how are you showing self-control right now in the hallway and stuff. So it's a constant reflection thing, but it gets the kids in that mindset that this is a continuing thing, that we're not just introducing it and being done with it, but this is ongoing and embedded throughout our day, every day at Meeker.
So after teaching it at the building level and having each team and each teacher kind of talk to the kids about it, we talked a lot about what are we going to do to keep it alive. We don't want to just kick off Meeker Cares for the first 6 weeks and then forget about it. So we kind of have had a lot of things going on throughout the year. One of the things, we got the PTO to buy us Meeker Cares t-shirts, which look just as good on adults as they do on kids. And we picked the colors on purpose because we wanted them to be noticeable. We put the acronym on with periods behind it so that people would say, what does CARE stand for, and that kids could talk about it. And we also thought on field trips it's pretty easy to pick out the Meeker kids if you all wear your Meeker Care shirts. So we want to thank the PTO for doing that, and we've had some special occasions where we've all worn them together. The hallways, we had Kathy Van Pelt, who's a media helper. I told her I wanted her to deck out the hallways, and she did. This is kind of a long view, but this is what it would look like. She has all of the words that make up CARES, and then pictures near them that show kids being responsible or kids showing self-control. So if you go down our main hallways, you'll see this. Out in the front entryway, couldn't get the S in here, but this is shot from inside looking out. Our art teacher, Susan Norris, on one of the first days of school, went in and decorated so it says CARES really big across the front of the building, so it's a constant reminder as you approach the building or when you're in the lunchroom that we're supposed to be showing Meeker CARES wherever we go. This came in a little bit later. Karen Klotzbach and Susan Norris, again, our art teacher, got together to brainstorm, how can we keep this going? And we just put one little word is what we called it, but we have calm and kind, and they're really big. When you're leaving the building at night, you can turn around and see them are still lit up from 20th Street. Just as a reminder, these aren't the words of CARES, but calm and kindness is certainly part of what we want the kids to do. So that's a constant reminder when they're in the lunchroom that we want them to be calm and kind. And this is the Meeker Cares thought of the day. This particular one says, little stuff matters, manners get you a long way. And Karen puts up a new one every day, and she's asked the teachers if you want to contribute a quote, and the teachers have done that. But every day there's a new one, and we have it right by the office so that anybody that comes in and out of the building will see the Meeker Cares thought of the day as they enter or exit. We committed we have the Meeker Speaker, which is our monthly newsletter, and we committed every month that we're going to talk about Meeker Cares and educate the parents as much as possible. I can't see, the font is so small, I don't know what month this is, but there's a picture of the whole newsletter, and then we zoomed in on the Meeker Cares part. This particular month we were talking about cooperation and just saying we are focusing on CARES with our students this year. Cooperation at school looks like being patient, sharing materials, taking turns, supporting each other, listening to each other's ideas. Please reinforce these ideas at home. please talk to your students about what cooperation looks like at home within your family as well. So we want the parents to say the same things at home that we're saying to the kids at school. In addition to those things, we've also talked about CARES at PTO meetings. We had a back-to-school night where all the teachers talked to the families about it. Instead of having friendship parties this year, we had Meeker CARES parties, and we all wore our shirts. And the teachers, as they send their weekly newsletters, they're including that. So we're trying to keep it alive as long as we can throughout the year. Andrea Delman couldn't be here tonight. She's part of the leadership team as well. And she shot some video and went around and asked kids, what does Meeker CARES mean to you? Or how did Meeker CARES make our building better? Her report was that they gave really good answers, and then she turned on a camera and they kind of froze a little bit. So you might see that right now, but this is, you're going to see Tyler, who's a 3rd grader, and then you'll see Jiwin, who's a 5th grader.
Cooperation helped me learn to listen to other people's ideas, and assertion helped me to stand up for myself if I need to, and responsibility helped me to respect others, and empathy made me learn to help other people when they get hurt, and self-control made me learn to not mess around.
So Meeker CARES helps because it makes people kind to each other, and it makes them have more respect to each other, and it reminds them to have responsibility and have assertion. It helps the school because when people think about it, it makes them want to help each other and be kind to each other.
And then our last slide, I hesitate to put this in here because this is the kind of thing that makes Karen Klossbach start crying. But we had, she's the one Karen's been putting up the thought of the day at the front of the building. And a little girl, Sophia, a 1st grader, spontaneously, unsolicited, just made one and brought it to Karen. And it says, use Meeker CARES forever, be calm and kind. And it's got little hearts that say Meeker. And she brought it to Karen. So that's not just posted as a thought of the day, that's just posted forever. It's going to be up all year. So do you have any questions that we can answer about our Meeker CARES initiative?
I just applaud you for this initiative. I think it's great to show those social skills to our students, so that's fantastic. Other comments, questions?
Do you have to make a conscious effort if a kid moves into the district, into Meeker, to initiate them into this? I mean, what do the teachers have to do to get that done?
There are students who move in, so it does, and that's when you take the break. I mean, we spend the first 6 weeks teaching these behaviors, and it is just as important to us as teaching what our academics are. And for them to become a part of the classroom, they do need to have those same expectations and understanding. So there will be some one-on-one teaching, but there's also a time that you go back with that student and get them with the whole class so they can hear their classmates share what they have learned, what that means, what that looks like. And it's another opportunity. I mean, you want to practice these behaviors all the time. So you pick the ones that maybe you're having trouble with in your classroom or in the hallway, or they're not doing well within the bathroom or whatever, and pick those teachable moments to do those things to help the students get up. And we have plenty of Meeker CARES t-shirts for everybody, and yeah.
So what are you looking at with next year to kind of go off of Dr. Rasmussen's? Have you thought about that yet? And
we haven't thought about how we're going to continue Meeker CARES next year, other than we know we want to continue, and the PTO is on board for t-shirts already. For the rest of this year, after we've kicked it off, we wanted to continue focusing on behavior. So our professional development for the rest of the year, we have 3 different book study groups going, and they're all focused on behavior. One book is called Power Struggles, one is called Tattling, Teasing, Defiance, and More, and one of them is called Fostering Resiliency in Learners. Is that right? So we've got 3 different groups going, and we're going to spend our Wednesdays discussing those books and what we can learn from those books to serve our students better. And at the same time, we're also building what we're calling a behavior toolkit. We have a techie young teacher that's helping us put together kind of a website, and teachers can contribute ideas to that and also steal ideas from that. And we're in the rough draft stage right now. It's still pretty sketchy, but we're hoping by the end of the year that we have something there, and then the idea that we'll build on it. But if a new teacher came into Meeker, for example, there would be a nice toolkit there showing what we've done and what we want to do. So we've only planned through the end of this year, but we know that we do want to continue it next year.
Are you looking at any comparative data in terms of, I would think for you in terms of some behavioral stuff, have you entertained the idea of making comparison of past year's data compared to this year's?
Well, no, I was just going to give you some advice. In terms of from last year, can't speak to that, but we did initiate a behavior screener at the beginning of this year, and so we gave it at the beginning of the year, mid-year, and at the end of the year. So that's the data that we have right now that we could connect, I think, to this initiative and to the work that we've been doing this year around the common language and the common expectations that we have.
What other plans do you have for next year? What ideas have you, from your experience this year, that you might tweak it for next year?
We really haven't talked about next year. We've been just trying to plan what we're going to do this year, and we're kind of excited about both the toolkit and the book study. We think the books that, I've only read one of them so far, but it was very good, and we think it's going to help us build our toolkit, so we're excited about that.
Great.
But we will, over the summers when we did our heavy lifting to get ready for this year, and I assume that that's what we're going to do this year as well.
The toolkit could be a great idea to roll out, district-wide as opportunities arise, so encourage that as well.
In closing, I'd like to just read just part of a letter that we got from a parent. It says, "The Meekers program instituted this year is brilliant, and I'm thrilled to see it at work in the kids and in the community. The next generation of Ames children is getting a great start on developing the kind of empathetic, caring, assertive, but not aggressive leadership we need for the future. When we return to my childhood home in New England to visit my parents, my mother, a retired teacher, marvels at what my kids know and can do. And it isn't that my kids are something extraordinary or even a grandmother's bias. It's the education they're getting that's awesome. And that education is awesome because of our teachers." So that really meant a lot to us.
Great, thanks
Thank
for the presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our next item tonight, it's the sale of the maintenance building. Dr. Taylor, if you want to provide an update?
I think between Chris and I, we can catch you up on this one. As the board knows, but the public may not, we actually began a process last September of working towards the sale of 3 pieces of unused property or property that we don't think that we'll be using in the future. And one of them happens to be the old facilities and maintenance building, which is located at 1621 Wilson Avenue. The new facilities and maintenance building that includes bus storage is nearing completion, as Jerry would tell me, maybe even by the middle of May, at a site on South Bell Avenue. With that in mind, the property at 621 Wilson Avenue is one that, again, we started last September towards sale of that particular piece of property. Our first move was to find interest, and those individuals who had interest in any of our properties were to complete what we called an interest use form. And the idea here was for us to find out as a board who was interested, not only who was interested in the property, but also how they were planning on using it, so that we could obviously meet the needs of several neighborhoods for which many of these locations or buildings are located. We then received bids from those whose interest appealed to the board. We did receive a bid on this particular piece of property from a gentleman named Usman Haq, who is an Ames resident and also an Ames businessman in town. He has plans on demolishing that particular building and constructing a single-family home. That being said, the sales agreement, which is attached and the board has reviewed, has also been reviewed by Mr. Hawk and myself. There is only one piece of language that we may need to change, and that will be a determination that will come up later, and that really comes back down to conditions whereby Mr. Hawk can have actual ownership of that particular piece of property. The original agreement indicated December of 2017, but we're way ahead of schedule, so we'll be working with Mr. Hawk to get that particular item changed. If you've got any questions, much later within our particular agenda, we'll come up with a board directive, and that board directive really tells the administrative team and staff to proceed with the sale of that particular property. So it's a directive coming up later on. But between Chris and Jerry and I, we're here to answer any questions that the board may have relative to this sale.
I would add that we have talked to the city. City leadership is aware of the sale, and since the underlying is residential, they're supportive of it moving forward. So the city council, when last we met, asked to be apprised of what's going on. So we continue to stay in contact with them.
And maybe for clarification, the item on the agenda coming up is to set a public hearing.
Correct.
For the next meeting. It is not approving the sale tonight. It is setting the public hearing, so.
Much like we do when we accept bids, we have to set a public hearing on those, and then there'll be a motion following the public hearing for the particular sale. Correct.
I suppose everyone knows what I'm going to say, and that is basically that I admire all the work that was done. It was nice to find an interested purchaser, but I continue to believe that we should be auctioning all of our properties.
Any other discussion? All right. Moving on. Committee reports, updates from what was provided. I did want to let the board know that following the facilities meeting on March 8th, Dr. Taylor and I met with city leadership to reopen the discussion regarding our shared use pool facility. We learned at the facilities meeting that we have some flexibility in how we pay for pool access in a lease scenario. Most importantly, we could use 1 cent or PEPAL money to cover a long-term lease, and if there is support from the community to construct a new city-owned facility, currently be considered a Healthy Life Center. Under this scenario, the city would construct the pool and the school district would be a tenant with priority scheduling. The details of the agreement are currently in development that would likely include a capital contribution and ongoing operating expenses in this long-term lease. The Facilities Committee agreed that it would be worth exploring a joint venture as an option as we continue to explore the pool issue. I know the city will be initiating a feasibility study in the next few months, so the timing of this discussion is advantageous, and we will continue to keep the Facilities Committee and the board apprised to our discussions. But again, it's the hope that we can find alternatives to having to pay for the operating costs out of our general fund, which we use to pay for staff and a lot of our expenses. So that's an update on that front.
I think one of the key items here is that, of course, we currently use our general fund to support the operating costs along with our partnership with the city. If the city were to build a particular pool, we could use 1 cent sales tax if there were clauses within that lease agreement relative to sharing the cost of the operating costs for that particular building, which would then free up for us somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $75,000 per year for our general fund. So it does have some great advantages that way. One of the perhaps disadvantages is that this facility would be owned by the city. It would not be located on school property, but some of our conversations with ACAC and other people within the community seems to indicate that that's not that big an issue. But we're moving down the road and exploring at least lease options with the city, who is in the process of putting together a Healthy Life Center.
I would just like to comment on that. I do have some concerns related to that, and I'm very interested and open-minded to hearing as how our conversations go. But I will qualify that, but, the concern that I have is that we are going to be using that lease situation, and if it's off school property or not adjacent to the high school property, it totally negates any use for educational use of the swimming pool. Right now, our primary use, yes, is for competition, and in that scenario, the competition would continue. But currently, our special ed students use the pool throughout the week for their gym classes and exercise. And also, I believe the high school is looking at doing a lifeguarding course in the future, if not next year, the following year. So, I do have a little hesitancy. It'd be great if this Healthy Life Center is going to be built adjacent to the high school property. That would work great. But those are the only concerns that I would echo right now from some others that I've spoken to in the community. And from an educational standpoint, our primary responsibility is our fiduciary responsibility is to the district and for that facility to be used primarily for educational purposes and those funds. So, that's where, I want to keep an open mind. I think we can definitely work together with the city on these things. That's something I've said from the very beginning. But I do want to point out that if it's not adjacent to or on high school property, that's really going to mean that the pool's only going to be used for competition and not any educational opportunities for our other students.
Would it be possible to ask for documentation of exactly what educational purposes it is used for currently and what potential educational purposes that Principal Evans is imagining he may want to add? I mean, I know he's had discussions that he may want to add some, or that he would at least look at it or whatever. I'd like him to weigh in on that, I guess.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hey, Luke, I needed to bump out of the Facilities Committee meeting before the conclusion of it. So does the city have some idea of timing on their evaluative process in relationship to this?
So likely the city council will be directing the city manager to move forward with the feasibility study. And talking with Steve last week, he was saying it's a 4 to 5 month process to get that feasibility study back. So the question is, I'd like to build momentum, but the key is they needed to know if we were in or out. And since we learned about the lease scenario as an option, I thought it was worth exploring. So likely there'll be city direction tomorrow to move this feasibility forward. Likely Dr. Taylor and Steve will be meeting to discuss what the needs will be probably in the next 30 days, so they can then push that out. So again, there needs to be some impetus to move this forward, but that's the time frame that city manager provided.
Am I remembering this wrong? Did we not ask for the city to clarify if they were in or out at our joint meeting, and give them a timeline to decide if they were in or out, and that timeline is and we're way past that timing?
I think there's been more encouragement by the council members to re-explore this, since that last meeting, was it last summer?
That's what jump-started them to get
Yeah, and
involved.
I think there's been more community feedback to the council members to reopen those discussions. So,
well, that would back my individual discussions with council members. My feeling is that the people of this city expect the two of us to get along and figure out how to make this work. And we've put a lot of effort into making this work. And so I guess, if we're way past the deadline we gave them and they're willing to come to the table now, that's great, because that's certainly what the people of this town expect us all to do. And we've tried, so now that they're trying, I'm fine with another delay, given that I figured my 22-year-old swimmer would swim in a brand new pool in this town, and now I'm pretty sure that my 15-year-old will never swim in a brand new pool in this town, so that's fine. I'm okay with another delay.
But I think as we look at, obviously, we're looking at our high school, and we've got a timeline laid out as we overlay this with that, being sensitive to that and continuing to work through things, so.
And get it right. I mean, if this gives us a better facility accessible to the future swimmers and the, you know, it's a 40 or 50-year decision here, so it's about kids that aren't even born yet, so let's get it right.
And to Lewis's point, potentially, as part of the high school, we could maybe figure out how it could sit on our site. You know, that'd be something I'd like to explore. If we can, we can, but it's at least worth a discussion.
Please.
Other updates? All right, moving on to the certified budget. Chris?
No. Oh.
Hopefully that's on now. This is our first look as the board at the certified budget. I did present the main numbers to the Budget and Audit Committee at the beginning of March. And Mr. Talbot, you'll find there's just one slight change because at that time I didn't know what income taxes paid was. So that's changed our cash reserve levy a little bit, but otherwise it's all the same information. The good news is the legislature set allowable growth much earlier this year. The bad news is that it was 1.11%. That generated an additional $73 per student. That was really small. See if I can learn this new camera. There we go. That generated an additional $73 per student. That ends up generating about $362,000 of additional revenue. We did have 45 more students open enroll into the district, which generates just under $300,000. And then the 1.11% is also applied to all our categorical funds as well. So when you add all those together, that ends up being new revenue of about $740,000. This page that's in your packet is my version of the aid and levy worksheet. So if you're curious on where the $361,000 comes from, you can kind of see how that all folds out. We start with all of our funding for all of our programs, generating $683,000. $321,000 of that is reserved for special programs like special ed and dropout prevention, the TLC grant, and so forth. And then we get down to our regular program, and you'll notice the $361,000 that matches the page before. Again, we added open enrollment and some of our categorical funds that we can use for salaries and benefits, because that's always what I'm trying to get to, is how much money we have to go towards salaries and benefits. Any questions on the aid and levy worksheet? So what this ends up doing is we have been trying to keep our tax rate steady at $14.34, and we've been just a little bit up above that. Last year we had a tax rate of $14.34101. This year the tax rate is proposed at $14.34089, so a 0.00012 cent decrease. It's as close as I could get to keeping it exactly the same. With these kind of numbers, it's hard to get it exactly the same. The one piece that did change is that I did increase the cash reserve levy. When we had met with the Budget and Audit Committee, I'd had that at $1,640,000, I believe, and I increased it $1,665,000. That's because at the time I did not know what income taxes paid for calendar year 15 was, and I got those numbers about a week ago, and I was able to plug them in. And what that meant is that
the amount of taxes for the instructional support levy went down from what I had proposed. So we're keeping the tax dollars the same for the general fund in total. Of note, again, is a very large debt service levy. We're not quite at the 405, but we are keeping our schedule for our advance refunding of bonds, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Any questions so far? Just in case you're interested in what happened to our property tax valuations. And I noticed as I was talking to Ms. Franson today that I hadn't gotten the years updated, so you'll see I've written in there. But these are the 100% assessed values for fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 18. Our assessed value went up 3.1%, and our taxable value went up 4.4% for PEPL and debt service, and it went up 3.5% for all the other levies. We continue to have good growth in our valuation, which is helping us keep our property tax rate the same. Questions? In your packet, and just in case you're interested, I've also put a history back from 2003 on what's happening with taxable valuation. I just find this kind of information interesting as I'm putting the budget together, but one thing that we might want to note, Ames had a tradition of not having much tax increment financing valuation. And so we went from fiscal year 12 of $7,000 up to fiscal year 18 of $30.5 million. So the tax increment value is growing significantly. It's different for us than it would be for the county or a government like that, in that our general fund rate is set by the formula. So it might affect our rate, but our valuations are going up pretty good anyway, so our rate it's not affecting our rate real adversely. But our debt service and PEPL go against the TIF increment as well, so it's not costing us any money on those two programs either. So it doesn't really cost us dollars because it doesn't affect the general fund and it doesn't affect PEPL or debt service, but I did find it kind of interesting how much that's grown. On this page towards the bottom, I just like to show what's going to happen to the property tax liabilities for different values of property. You'll notice that I have the tax rate of $14.34 here from last year, and the proposed tax rate of $14, and well, it's still 34, but just slightly down. If you look at a $100,000 house, the same $100,000 house, a house that was assessed at $100,000 last year and $100,000 this year, the taxes will go up $18.83 on that house because the residential rollback is increasing. And when the residential rollback increases, that means that you are paying taxes on a higher percent of your assessed value than you did the prior year. So in fiscal year 17, residential property owners paid property taxes on 55.62% of the value of their property. And this year we will pay taxes on 56.93% of our valuation of our property. The commercial has been rolled back to 90%, and that is being somewhat replaced by state funds at least through 2018.
And Chris, can you inform the public who sets that rollback?
I'm sorry?
Who sets that rollback?
The residential rollback is a formula that is done by the Iowa Department of Revenue. Basically, there's two different functions to the rollback. One is there is a state law that says no class of property can increase by more than 4% statewide. So that's the first thing they look at when they roll back property. And that's statewide, not by jurisdiction. So if Ames's residential property is up 6%, but the rest of the state averages out to 4%, there would be no change in the rollback. And that's more, I should probably say that would be more typical with the other types of property. Residential is a little bit different in that it's also tied to agricultural property. And the rollback statute says that residential property statewide is not allowed to grow at any greater rate than agricultural property that year. So if Agricultural property is at 2% increase statewide, and residential is at 4%. Statewide, residential is rolled back to a 2% increase. Ms. Franson and I was looking at the history back to 2003, and you can kind of see by the residential rollback when we were in a good economic upturn and when we were down, because in an upturn, the rollback starts to go up, and in a downturn, it starts to go down. We are still at 2018 being taxed at a lower percent on the value of a residential property than we were in 2003. I put this in your packet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. First of all, there's just a lot of numbers, but this is our unspent budget report. I do believe that we are stabilizing it, and as we made some efforts last year to recoup some spending authority through the special ed supplement, and we're maintaining that. And as long as we stay within our revenues and stay within the spending authority the state has given us, which we've been doing, this year's a little the exception, but we do try if our expenditures are exceeding or increasing at a higher rate than our growth, and we make cuts to stay within that. I believe that we've probably stabilized our unspent authority and are in pretty good shape. I just want to point out this page because I just think it's interesting. Everybody likes to compare how our neighbors are doing or how we are doing in relation to our neighbors. Ames continues to have the second highest valuation per student in the county with the 7th lowest tax rate in the county. If it wasn't for the amount of debt service that we're levying and pre-funding, we would be almost the lowest in the county. So for us to be that low of a tax rate in the county and levying almost the max on debt service is exceedingly good. Also in your packet, I just put the history of certified enrollment. Our enrollment went up just under 7 students, so that gives you an idea where we are there. Again, a lot of numbers on our debt service bond schedules. This is in your packet, but it does lay out our plan for pre-funding or advanced funding of the debt service. So for fiscal year 2018, we'll be levying $7,335,000 to retire debt early, or I should say to escrow up for when the bonds become callable, in addition to our annual debt service requirement. And the main reason I wanted to put that up there was for the important page, because the goal would be as if there would be a major project in the future that we'd be able to do that without affecting our tax rate. So it does show that from fiscal year 15 through fiscal year 20, that we're planning on prepaying $26.3 million of bonds, and more importantly, saving just under $6.2 million of interest by doing that.
Chris,
Yes.
throw that one back up there for a minute. That is all based on your projections for bonding for whatever we decide to do with the high school, correct? Or any other debt that we may have for the district?
The prepaying of the debt is is happening regardless of what happens in the future.
Okay.
What it does by doing it is it pays off our bonds that we issued in 2012, 13, and 14.
Okay.
Early, so that it gives us bonding capacity and tax rate capacity if we want to do a major new project.
What about any other debt we take between now and 2029? Does that
Well, we
affect
can't do any additional debt without a vote of the people.
Right.
Except for sales tax. This doesn't include any sales tax revenue bonds. We could do sales tax revenue bonds, but
if
this
we
is just
were-
GEO.
But if we were, would we be able to go beyond what I'm driving at? Of course, the legislature right now, we have a sunset on the SAVE, and unable to borrow because of that. And is that going to be impacted if that doesn't get changed this year? If this, what you're showing us right now, would it be impacted and how would it be impacted?
Again, what I'm showing you right here is geo debt only, property tax based, has nothing to do with sales tax.
Okay.
So from the impact of sales tax, we're limited on what we borrow for the remaining life of the existing law of the sales tax, which is 2029. So when they extended the sales tax, it allowed a lot of school districts to issue more sales tax revenue bonds because they could go out 20 years. But when the tax first went into place, all we knew was how to do sales tax bonds over 10 years. So you would just adapt until that sunset is hopefully extended.
Yeah, because the hope is that, and the legislation that's being considered is to extend it to 2050. And that's what we want everybody to contact their legislators about and let them know that we want that done. Because what we do is we borrow against that future penny. And that's why, when I see numbers here talking about 2033, it got my attention. Going beyond that 2029, or even beyond further if you've gotten your next chart.
Right, so for instance, on this one, these are 2 revenue bonds, and they go out until the sunset of the current. That wouldn't change for these, but any additional ones that we might issue, then we would go out, it's a max of 20 years, so we couldn't go over the 20 years, but we could have either a larger sales tax bond issue, or we could have one that's spread out over a longer time so that we can use the cash as we get it in.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's good clarification. We're paying down the debt on the current GO bonds, and we'll have those paid off by June 30th of 2020. And I think Chris, again, pointed to the very important fact that what that really does is it will save the district over $6 million in interest payments by paying it off as quickly as we can. But I think your point is a good one, Louis, from the standpoint that we cannot extend ourselves beyond 2029 with what we do with our 1-cent sales tax. And we do have some of that tucked away in one of Chris's drawers because we were looking at how we can use that for both a swimming pool and also buying down any future GO bond debt that we may have on a renovated or new high school. So it all comes into play, but we can't extend ourselves beyond 2029. It would be really nice if the legislature would move that to 2050. That would bring in almost an additional $70 million to the district in 1-cent sales tax for all kinds of building and other needs. I'd like to see them also let us be able to use that for transportation because that would free up another $1.1 or $1.2 million in general fund that we spend on transportation. That would really make a lot of districts very healthy.
The only thing that I would add is the conversation that you had prior about the lease arrangement. If you were going to either use PEPL or sales tax for a lease arrangement on a potential pool, you are limited to the life of the debt or the tax. So for PEPL, if we get it on the ballot this fall and it's approved, we would have 10 years that we could use that for lease payments. The sales tax, we'd be limited until 2029, or until it's extended. But we can only use cash on hand for those lease arrangements. We cannot issue debt for the lease arrangements, so.
I think one final comment, just perhaps for the public and those that are watching. This is a certified budget that's required by the state. Chris works on this quite hard, and there is a deadline of April 15th that we have to submit this to the state. So that's why we're bringing it forward. I think the really interesting thing here, and the easiest way that I can explain this perhaps for the public is, if you sat down on New Year's Eve and decided that you were going to lay out all of your line items and expenditures for your household and make the very best guess on how much you're going to spend for electricity, utilities, food, every item that's in your budget. That's what Chris does for an $80 million budget. So she lays it out based on history and based on trends and submits that to the state. That's not to say that we don't get surprises sometimes. A few years ago, we did have a really nasty, extremely cold winter, so you use more gas than perhaps you do historically. But that's the purpose of the certified budget.
And that leads me right into my final documents. So later in the evening, you will have an action item in front of you to set a budget hearing for April 10th, which will allow you to adopt the budget before the April 15th deadline that we're required to file it with the county auditor. So this page, and I'm sorry about how this works on the camera, but this page is the summary of all funds. So this is the general fund, the PEPAL fund, the sales tax fund, debt service, everything. That is what we certify or adopt our budget on. I am proposing a budget that has just over $74 million of revenue and just over $73 million of expenditures. Before we get too excited, most of that excess is in the capital funds because we don't have anything scheduled for sales tax after the maintenance building. And then just to show you on this is how that breaks down by the general fund, the activity fund, the management fund, PEPAL, sales tax, and so forth. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on that, but that is how then the attachment that you have with the action item that is the actual forms that the state requires us to file. Mine mimic them, but I didn't put both of them in both attachments. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify that this is really about, excuse me, establishing the tax rate, essentially the property tax rate. This is not the superintendent's budget where we choose priorities for how the money necessarily gets spent between teachers and supplies and so on and so forth. It's all sort of embodied in here, but that's a different budgeting exercise that is forthcoming. This is the state requirement that we have to be able to back into what our tax rates will be, basically.
It sets our tax rate, and then it also sets the 4 control areas for determining whether we need a budget amendment a year from now. So I'll be looking at that for the fiscal year 17 budget to see if we need to amend it. So it does those 2 things.
We'd like to thank Chris and Dr. Taylor for putting this together. It's always great to provide stability to our taxpayers here in Ames. So thank you for your efforts. All right, moving on. Next discussion item, Board Policy BDDH/KD, public participation at board meetings. Tim and Rodney.
I thought you meant moving it to the end of the meeting, so I'm just pulling it back up here. We've discussed this a few times. I've gone on record saying that I believe that we should open up a forum for people in the public to come to the table to be able to discuss the items on our discussion agenda. I think we've decided that we are not interested in this time in opening that up to consent items or action items, but I certainly would reiterate that everything that I've heard from people around town is that they want the opportunity. We have people that are experts in subjects, and I believe that they should be able to come to the table and give us their feedback. If somebody at this table wants to engage in conversation with them during that time, that's up to a board member, I guess. But I certainly, it's not the proper forum for that, but it is the proper forum for people in our public to be able to give us their opinion and for us to listen. And I would hope that we would pass that part of this, even if there's other things that need to be changed.
So the way, go ahead,
No, go
Rodney.
ahead. Please, go ahead.
I was just going to clarify what I was reading here. So basically, the proposal is that So tonight, we had 5 discussion items on our agenda, for example, and if we would have a discussion item would happen, we might have that from staff, we might have that from somebody else, then we as a board may discuss or ruminate on that. Then if there are members of the public that wanted, that had something to offer related to that, they would have an opportunity to do so at that time. Not instead of a public forum, which is for something not on the agenda, but there'd be that opportunity for the more relevant inputs, the more relevant ideas at that time. That's really the material change of this. So it makes it a little bit more of a back and forth, whether it's an exchange or whether it's just the immediacy of the item and the ideas in relationship to that item. That's
Yes, and I think the last board meeting proved that this is the right step, where we did present some issues at the board table, and then most of the speakers that came that night wanted to talk about that exact item, and it was almost exactly what we've laid out in this policy, is that the public would be able to come up and speak. It wasn't intentional that it happened that way, but that last board meeting showed exactly, I think, the power of making this change, that we can hear from people that are possibly more intimately involved with the topic, or more knowledgeable of the topic, or, and is that going to happen every time? No. Is it hopefully going to happen most of the time? Yes. And I think it has the potential to tamp down some of the rhetoric and to actually get us useful information that we can use to make decisions. Because sometimes public forum isn't always useful. And I think that this step will make public forum more useful, and will make the public comment section inside our discussion items more useful.
The only thing I maybe changed based upon our feedback last time is at the very bottom, when we talk about discussion items on the agenda, it says the public may comment on discussion items after presentation and board discussion. I think it might be more helpful if we were to have the presentation, have public forum to solicit that feedback, because that may prompt greater discussion amongst the board, which then we could direct staff to bring us more information. So my only adjustment would be to put the public forum for the discussion item between the presentation and then other board discussion.
I think our conversation was that it would probably, if it's on the discussion item until we move on to the next topic, we are still at liberty to discuss it more. And so I think that I'm okay with it either way, but I think the thought was that if we open it up to staff presentation, then board discussion, then public comment, and then if board wants to discuss further, we haven't moved on to the next topic yet, that we are certainly at liberty to go ahead and discuss that more amongst ourselves if we so choose. And so it isn't limiting that once the public speaks, that we automatically go on to the next item.
Okay.
That was our intention within the policy committee discussion. I guess it doesn't necessarily say that, but that's...
Yeah. And Tim, I'd have to support you in that approach, because I'm thinking just logistically. If we have the presentation like we had tonight's presentation from Meeker, they're at the microphone already. So then like we interacted tonight, we asked questions, clarified things. Then once that's done, then public would come up, talk about it, and then we would have any clarification or questions with them. Whereas if you move that around, you'd be asking, the staff or the other group to come back to the microphone. So, it might get kind of awkward or miss an opportunity for people or the board members to ask any questions of clarification. So I think it's great. Let me just add to this. I think adding the opportunity for public comments during our discussion items is great. I think it's a long time in coming. I would be concerned about the very last statement in here, where it says, therefore, speakers from the public shall not expect to engage in conversations with individual directors. I would rather have the language that is currently in our policy that says the board may ask questions for clarification of those individuals. In addition to that, this proposal related to public forum, I would like us to retain our current policy that states the board may ask questions of clarification of individuals that come and speak to us during public forum. I'd rather not have that completely stricken out. I think we really diminish the opportunity for people to come and speak during public forums when all it is a one-sided thing. They come, they go to the mic, they say something, and we all sit here stone-faced and listen. Our current policy states that board members can ask questions of clarification regarding what they say. And I think that's a much healthier way to approach communication, and I'd like to see that maintained in our policy.
I don't think the wording of this says that you can't.
It's striked out.
It doesn't.
The fact that
Well,
it's
you're talking
struck
about that
out
last
doesn't
sentence.
create an omission. It actually just removes the language and specifies or puts preference on the language that gives guidance that we're not here to have the discussion with them. As far as what you're asking for, you're looking for more of what I believe to be a rules piece of it to give further clarification for our understanding of how to apply the policy. I don't have any issues with asking a question for clarification purposes, but as the policy now states, we're not trying to engage in that discussion with people. We just want to hear what they have to say. If we need clarification, just like we would with the presenters who would ask for that clarification, but that doesn't necessarily need to be something worded in policy. That can be something that's put with regards to rules to give greater depth of understanding how to apply it.
No, I disagree. I think it needs to stay in the policy. Otherwise, people think the policy means something else. So I would like to see it stay in the policy. Thanks.
One of the things that I want to remind the board about is in the fourth paragraph, we have to keep in mind that it's not legal for the board to discuss items that are not on the agenda. So when things are brought forward, and I agree that it always seems awkward that during public forum, people may speak and we don't respond, and that does feel awkward, but we don't respond because we cannot. If it's not an item that's on the agenda, Iowa Open Meetings Law prohibits us from having that kind of discussion. You can ask questions. You may not engage in discourse.
Right.
So,
And
just
Dr.
as a
Taylor, I
reminder.
totally agree with you. Simply, and I think our current policy is well within that law. If somebody comes and makes a comment during public forum, an expert in some area of education, and one of the board members wants to ask a clarification of what they're saying or a point they're making, I think that's well within the law. So that's all I'm saying. I'm saying I think we should stick with that short verbiage in there. As a matter of fact, what was in there, it said may discuss an item and ask questions for clarification. I would agree that we should strike the may discuss an item. That's problematic. But I think we should retain the ask questions for clarification when that opportunity rises.
Going back to that last, I thought you pointed out that last sentence on the whole policy, didn't you? Your original comment that you're talking about that last sentence, therefore speakers shall not expect to engage in conversation. Isn't that what you brought up?
Correct, yeah, I just don't think it's really
Well,
necessary.
but that's what I'm saying, is that sentence doesn't mean that it can't happen, it just says that they shouldn't expect it. I personally don't I would make that change. I would agree with what you're saying. That sentence doesn't exclude that we can ask anything that we so choose. It just says that they shouldn't expect to. Personally, looking back at it, it's not a well-written sentence. It's writing to the negative, where the one that you want to put back in there writes to the positive of what we can do, and that's what it should say. So let's talk about what we can do, and if everybody's in agreement that we can ask questions for clarification, then let's change that sentence to put that back in there. I'd rather hear what we can do and not what we can't do.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I would say if we just restated, because you're talking about two things. You're talking about public forum, and then you're talking about discussion items. So if we just restated that sentence in the same form in each section.
We want the
I think
format to be the
address
same
it.
in both sections.
Correct.
And so the question would be, there isn't a question, never mind, because to follow this the way we should do this, the policy committee is going to come forward with a recommendation with the rewritten policy at the next board meeting, and the 7 of us can either vote it up or down, and that's the way this should happen, because we can't make that decision tonight. So as a policy committee, I'll take your suggestion under advisement. Rodney and I will discuss it. We'll decide if we're going to put it in there, and then that will get brought up at the next board meeting. If you don't like the wording that we come up with at that time, make your motion to make that revision, and if it wins, it wins. And if we make the revision in policy meeting, then that's the one that'll come forward, and if somebody else doesn't like it, they can make the motion to scratch it back out of there, and if that wins.
I'll
it'll
help
do
you
that.
out and send you one tonight.
Please, yeah, no, we've got a couple weeks to get that last little rewrite. I'll take that under advisement, and Director Briggs and I will make the decision on what policy we're bringing back forward for the vote.
I continue to believe that this is the worst possible forum to have discussion. That being said, I recognize that we need to do something to have more interaction. So, how do we do that? What I would like to see done is for the policy committee to bring forward what they believe is appropriate. It doesn't matter if we're not unanimous on our vote. But in order to garner my vote, it's going to have to be a sunsetted temporary policy. What I mean by that is that we pass something that the policy committee brings to us, and we have a sunset date of August 1st, 2017. So what we have done in effect, the way I visualize this going, is that we have a temporary test policy that supersedes current policy. And if it's a lousy decision, it sunsets automatically. If it's a good decision, then we pass a permanent policy, and we have the opportunity to make some revisions to that policy based on our experience.
We already have that in policy, that board members can bring anything up to get it put on the agenda. So, I mean, that could be brought up if this is passed, whatever is passed, whatever policy, any policy that board members could bring up for it to be reviewed again, effective at that time, basically. And so it could be brought up at the table. Would that be, I'm okay with doing it that way. I don't mind. I just think we already have that vehicle to have anything reviewed that we need to review already in policy.
I understand we have the vehicle, but if it's not successful, we don't have to waste our time eliminating the policy that did not work.
It could really be as simple as just requesting that this policy be re-advised by the committee August of 2017. And then the committee looks at it again at that time. It's on the calendar, it happens.
And we've done that
If
with
we
other
don't like
policies.
it,
Yeah.
we scrub it.
We've done
If
that
we
with
like
other
it, we keep
policies in the past, that we've moved things around on the calendar. They're all on a schedule as to when they're going to be reviewed, but there's times that we've bumped some of them forwards or backwards based on just I guess based on the policy committee's opinion. We've moved things around on the review, or on administration's opinion on if something needed to be reviewed sooner or later. We've done the same thing, that use of school properties, one was up for review, I think we started that 2 years ago, and then we tabled it because it wasn't going to serve any purpose until we had more information. And so we do jockey them around on our schedule. If you'd like that one to go back on the schedule, for review, whatever date, I think that's a great idea, so. Because this is a test. This is a test, no matter what we do, and so to put a date on it, I'm fine with that.
But there's a great difference between review and sunset.
Yeah.
And my point is that if it's a failure, I don't want the board to have to go through the gyrations of who supports listening and who doesn't support listening, and speeches about what we should be doing in the future. If it's unsuccessful, it ought to just sunset and we're done with it. If it's successful, then we continue to move forward.
There's going to be a learning curve on public coming to the table to discuss things. I guess that date might move forward or backward to please you. I could see that. I'm fine with that, just that we put a sunset date on it and that it has to be reapproved in order to stay in policy. Otherwise, it just goes away and just reverts back to the old policy.
Yes.
Do we have the power to do that? I'm assuming we can write that into this. So if we can do that, then do it.
Sure. We would have the power to do that. I would vote against it. I think at any time, we have proven over every meeting, we consider policy changes. And it doesn't have to be something that's, on the calendar in the regular review. We can consider a new policy at any time. So I think to put a sunset on this is unnecessary. If we find even in July that we need to make some changes to it and tweak it in some manner, then, I don't think we should tie our hands because of a sunset or something. So, yeah, I think we have the flexibility within our rules and policies right now to do it. I don't see a need for a sunset at this time.
And I will point out the other thing that's in this policy is that it changes it from a request of 3 board members to get an item on the agenda, and it drops that to 2. It was my feeling that it's kind of silly to have to be 3 board members because you almost have a consensus at that point. And so I wanted that dropped down one notch to if 2 board members get together and want something placed on the agenda, that's all that it will take. If we make the changes as written right here, that's all that it would take. And that makes the sunset part, I think, kind of irrelevant, but I'm more than willing to write it that way.
I kind of concur there. We have another policy that would be in contradiction of this policy if this were to revert back, because we have another policy that specifies 2 board members, which is why we wanted to get that language to marry up and be appropriate. I think that there's one point on this policy that's really in discussion of is it good or bad, and that's the brand new clause with regards to discussion items and having input from community on those items. The rest of the policy, I think we're really addressing things that need to be corrected within the policy as it's written. And I would hate to step backwards because of one issue on the policy. I'd rather review it and then correct a problem if there's a problem within it. I think we'd be doing ourselves more work and more injustice if we go backwards in time. The only other thing that I've got a question on for myself is with regards to the amount of time that we provide people to speak. While I believe that 3 minutes is nice because it is a short, concise amount of time, I can remember a time before I was on this board where I would come and speak, and I found the 3-minute window to be very difficult to express a thought, an idea, whatever it may have been. I felt like there wasn't enough time sometimes to fully express what I was trying to state. And in looking at the way conversations have gone as of late, I find that a lot of people are running upwards of 5 minutes in their conversation with us or their statement to us. So I'm not opposed to extending that time frame a minute, 2 minutes, within reason. I just feel that that might give people more of an opportunity to state what they're trying to say, not rush through an idea or a thought. I would still caution that people do need to be respectful of the amount of time that they are provided and try to stay within that time frame. But I would kind of like input as to whether or not that's a way to move forward as well.
I mean, I feel that there's all kinds of ways to reach out to us. And agreeing with Bill, I think this forum is a horrible place to have a dialogue. So we conduct business in this setting but we're always available to the public. You can email the whole board, call the whole board as a way of communicating. So I think the 3 minutes is fine. It's worked in the past. I provided a lot of latitude on people talking. As things get tense, I think it's the board president should probably make sure that it's respectful dialogue and that we keep to the 3 minutes. We used to have a timer, and I stopped using it, but I think it may be best that we adhere to it because we don't want to give preferential treatment to people. So I guess I'm not supportive of having a dialogue. The other thing as I struggle with is the board president's going to have to then moderate whether it's a dialogue or a question that's being asked. That can really easily turn into a dialogue. So I'd much rather have the discussion with the public in a more personal way that's not at this forum. I think it's very appropriate to receive feedback, but I don't think this is the best mechanism to do it. So I agree with the proposal as presented.
Something I just wanted us reflecting on as I'm listening to this discussion about the sunset or the review. I like the idea of maybe identifying a time that we will review this for the public as well. We're trying this and you're trying this. This whole discussion piece, I appreciated that the way everything happened at the last meeting, like Director Rasmussen said, in terms of providing our staff the opportunity to give us some thoughts. We were able to have some discussion, but then to be able to have the public come up to hear maybe some things that maybe inform some of the comments that they were going to make. So I feel that that is a really helpful framework. But I do want to, because this is a change, I would like to encourage us to think about, okay, in August or whatever, I don't necessarily need the sunset, but let's review it. Let's be intentional about coming back. So that is a commitment to the public to say, this is when we're going to review this and help us understand if you're feeling like this is meeting those needs. Understanding, I am not supportive of the discussion for the very things that have been mentioned in terms of this framework and this setting is not conducive to that. But it is definitely an opportunity for us to hear from the public on specific topics, whether it is on the discussion items that are on the agenda or in the public forum.
Any comment, Mike?
Pardon me?
Any comment?
Yeah, I think the way this proposal is articulated, I think is pretty decent to the topic of 3 minutes. I've seen chairs in my day extend a little more latitude to people when we have 2 people lined up to speak as opposed to 14 lined up to speak. And that's a little less about us and a little more about all the effort and intentionality that community members are having. So I think three minutes is a decent starting point, and as long as the chair is reasonable and folks are reasonable, it's about not just respect for us, it's respect for everybody that's taking time out of their day to do this. So, I think while I don't necessarily agree with the sunset, we've talked about this for about 6 meetings and we're still not there. So let's get there, wherever there is, and get this party started.
Do we want, last question for me, do we want something in there? Because at that last meeting, we did recognize another person to come up and speak that was not on the sign-up. It does still say that we are going to have a sign-up and that they must sign up. Should we add a sentence that says at president's discretion, additional speakers may be recognized?
No, I guess my preference would be that they need to sign up. Otherwise, it's not going to be manageable, in my opinion. They need to sign up beforehand.
And in reality, to be very honest, if somebody knows they're going to be late, which, hey, they're running late, they have to work, life happens, right? Somebody else can put their name on the list. I mean, really, we don't police.
No, it's not allowed in policy. In the current policy.
Does it say that personally? I mean, we don't police and make sure, we don't check their ID and make sure that
we don't know who put their name on the list.
Put their name on the list.
They could.
That's the point I'm making, is that their name could at least get on the list if somebody calls a friend and says, hey, I'm running late, get my name on the list. I mean, I think we can be, flexible enough to do that if possible.
But I think it's okay for us to ask the public to help us with this policy in
Right.
terms of understanding that that is the policy, that we do want you to get here in time, sign up, because I don't want it at the president's discretion, because I believe that puts that individual in a unique situation.
I think unless there's other comment, anybody wants to add, I mean,
Yeah.
Director Briggs and I have enough direction to make the last little revisions and bring you something that you guys can either vote up or vote down, and we'll move on from there.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to consent items. I'll take a motion.
Move approval of consent items as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Briggs. Discussion, Dr. Briggs.
The consent item contains minutes from February 27, claims and payroll also from February 2017. I'm sorry, I think I said 2007, perhaps on the first one. We'll jump ahead, 10 years ahead to 2017. The financial reports also from February of 2017. You want to take note of the personnel report. There are 4 additional and final voluntary early retirement requests. Wilma Evans, who has worked 22 years for the district as an elementary English as a second language teacher. Karen Stewart, who has worked 22 years as a vocal music teacher at Ames Middle School. Miss Linda Nerdig, who is a special needs teacher at Mitchell School after 24 years. And Kurt Smaltz, who is a science teacher at Ames High and has been in that role for 33 years. I would also take note for the board that there is an addendum, and on that particular addendum is the resignation of Mr. Jonas Michaels, our Director of Student Programs. I wanted to just take an opportunity to thank Jonas. I've come to know him as a man of integrity and compassion, and he's represented himself, and I think this district statewide and almost nationally with a lot of class and dignity, and he's going to be missed as both a colleague and a friend. So thanks, Jonas. There's quite an extensive list of gifts to the district. That includes a paperback and hardcover books from Shelley Barker to the Meeker Media Center, costumes and accessories from Kathy Twitto to the high school theater department, cash in the amount of $2,000 to the Ames High School Booster Club for hotel expenses for the state wrestling tournament, a 2.5 HP radial arm saw, a stand and accessories from Roger Murphy to the high school woodworking class, office and classroom supplies from Wiley Publishing to Meeker School, 12 fossils from the ISU Geology Department to the Middle School Science Department, Cleveland alto sax, Selmer clarinet from Ed Kaiser to the High School Music Department, and several bags of hygiene items from the First United Methodist Church to the District Homeless Program. There's an extensive list of donations to the district. Before I get to that one, Leslie Weibel also has donated a recliner to fellows for an IEP, which is necessary for one of the students in the special ed room. Following that comes an extensive list of cash gifts to the district to help with the demolition of the old Edwards building. We do have a letter of intent that was put together and actually had some verbal approval from Joel Barber in the older Edwards neighborhood for that demolition. The purpose here is that their donations are coming to the district to help us with the cost of the demolition of that property. The end result for the board is to sell that property for a very, very low amount, perhaps $1, keeping in mind that we cannot give property away as a public entity, but we can sell it. And we have sold property before for $1 to the city. So it is our intent somewhere along the line to reach a sales price with the city, which will then turn the old Edwards property, when it is clean and green, into a public park. The donations include $10,000 from Patrick and Catherine Schnabel, $5,000 from Ken and Diane Burt, $5,000 from Ken and Ray Tree Platt, $2,000 from Michael King and Sarah Nusser, $1,000 from Bruce Harmon and Pat Brown, $500 from A. Rhoda Mansbach, $500 from Stephen Holland, $500 from Peter and Marnie Buck, $500 from Dee Dreesen, $300 from Beverly Jones, $250 from Bryce and Paula Dreesen, $100 from Marilyn Griffin, $100 each from Jim and Suzanne Rowe, from Christine Ellis, and from Don and Mary Eichner, $50 each from Bruce and Muriel Hawk and Gary and Diane Wiggins, $25 each from Norman and Shelley Hawkins, Ken and Cameron and Elizabeth Baird, and Thomas and Elizabeth Gardner. In addition to, and we certainly appreciate those gifts, and we'll get a letter of our appreciation out. In addition, there are 3 contracts on the consent agreement, one from for Princess and Pirates for face painter for the 6th grade party, which is coming on April 7th. The agreement with J&M Productions for DJ services for the prom, which will be held on April 8th. And a cooperative agreement with Buena Vista University for teacher placements for 2016-17 with Dr. Ross. We also have some continuous open enrollment applications.
Any further discussion?
Yes. Jonas, it's been my privilege to become your friend. Voting to accept your resignation and consent agenda does not do any justice to deepness with which I'll miss you. You've taught me quite a great deal about children and our students, and your calm and steadfast and unwavering belief in children that have difficulties will be sorely missed. I'll miss you, friend.
Any other comments? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Item 19.
I move the board approve the, I move the board approve the policies as presented.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Rasmussen. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Item 20.
I move the board approve the 2017-18 student fees and rates for voluntary purchases as presented.
Second.
Moved by Franson, second by Briggs. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Item 21.
I move the board direct the board secretary to publish the proposed budget and to set the date and time for public hearing for April 10, 2017 at 6:30 p.m.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Briggs. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Item 22.
I move the board approve the resolution authorizing that this board shall set a public hearing on the conveyance of the above described property for April 10th, 2017 at 6:30 p.m. in the boardroom at the district offices, 2005 24th Street, Ames, Iowa, and that the secretary is authorized and directed to prepare and publish and distribute the notice of hearing.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Rosser. Discussion.
Above described being 1621 Wilson Avenue.
What's that?
Yeah.
Just the way the language of the motion was worded, it was above described, but there was no above described, unless it was higher up in the agenda. So I'm just clarifying it's 1621 Wilson Avenue, the maintenance building. That's all. Maybe more of an anecdotal than a procedural clarification.
Okay. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Item 23.
Move the board approve new open enrollment applications as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Franson. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Item 24.
I move the board reject all bids for the Edwards Elementary demolition and deconstruction project.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Rasmussen. Discussion. Okay, proceed to vote on roll call.
Rosser, aye.
Briggs, aye.
Rasmussen, aye.
Franz and I.
Deirdre, aye.
Talbot, aye.
Esposito, aye.
Passes 7-0. Item 25.
I move the board approve the Notice of public hearing, April 24th, 2017, plan specifications, form of contract, and estimated total cost of the old Edwards Elementary demolition and deconstruction.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Rasmussen. Discussion.
Is there any reason we should give the public a heads up on what had just happened here?
We did accept, and Jerry, I think, come on up, you might be able to help, but we did accept last week a date for acceptance of bids for the demolition of the old Edwards building. That was set for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We did receive 5 bids on time, a grand total of 7. And this is where the difficulty came into play.
You thought 5.
Yeah. For the most part, bid openings, the contractors arrive early and submit their bids so that they are there, and they, in essence, we receive the bids by the deadline date of 2 o'clock, and it's a very strict deadline date. If I knew that it was happening and walked in at 2:03, the bid would be rejected. As I pointed out, we had 5 that were there on time. We also had 2 that were in district on time, that were sent out of state. Our policy is that when things arrive in the district by UPS or FedEx, they automatically go to Central Stores, which is in Jerry's building, and then the mail delivery service delivers them here at 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. One of them was delivered in the morning and put in my mailbox. Another one arrived just after 2 o'clock in this particular building, so that one essentially is going to be rejected. Where we have a problem is the one that was put in my mailbox was taken by someone else who's an employee of the district, who got confused with their mailbox, with my mailbox, carried it around with them until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in which case they came in and said, "I think you want this." Well, in order to be fair, we consulted with our school's attorney, who said, your best advice from me is to reject all bids and start all over. Jerry, I don't know if you've got anything else to add, but we'll certainly try to answer any questions relative to that. When an attorney, with all due respect, says, "This is your best advice," I listen. So
there could have been.
Can you say that again, please?
Yes.
No.
When any attorney advises me to do something, I listen.
Just wanted to make sure I heard it right.
And Dr. Taylor, I think this falls into the category of life happens. So
Yeah, this
people
one,
can understand.
It felt really sloppy until we started to dig in. Why did this happen that way? And it was just because it's actually part of a board policy on hazardous materials that UPS and other things go to Jerry's office instead of coming here. So one of them at 2:10 and the other one mistakenly taken out. But they were in district, which seems kind of fair, but at the same time not fair. You know, the option was to just reject those 2 and move on, but our attorney thought, let's start all over, and it's not going to create a major delay in what we're trying to accomplish.
Doesn't in any way hurt our timing on this? We're talking, do you have a feeling that this hurts our timing? I mean, it doesn't matter at this point. We already rejected the other bid, so I guess my question doesn't really matter, but your feeling on whether this hurts us with the timing of getting bids?
Yeah, this should delay us by 1 month, so we're looking at being able to put this on the agenda, or have the public hearing and then approve and award the bids then 24th of April. So, we've had some communications with some of the bidders, and then I have John Seymour here with FEH who's here also. He's been in contact with some of the bidders, and it's been everything from, okay, I'll rebid it. We understand and they're going to go forward. I think there was 1 or 2 expressed some dissatisfaction and dismay, I guess. I did get a call from another contractor that hadn't bid the job that was wondering if he could bid it. So I let him know what the deal was. So I think there's a couple of the higher bidders that are likely to not rebid it. But other than that, I think we should still be able to get several bids and have competitive bidding.
So the bidders did see the amounts?
It's a public, we read it.
It was public letting at that time that you, okay.
So we did,
That's what I figured.
we did open and read the late bids in the public setting.
Okay.
So to protect this going forward, I know the motion was to have it at the district offices, so if someone sends it to Jerry, how do I protect from this happening again?
It's going to be, go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, we've addressed that. We're going to make sure that we notify people about the bidding, and then also in the bidding documents, we're going to put a provision in there to provide additional markings or on the envelope. So we need a big flashing neon sign that says, "Deliver me to the business office before
Okay.
2 o'clock," type of thing.
Okay.
Since we've been talking about policy, do we need to revisit this in policy, or is this just in the administrative rules?
I don't
You
think
know?
we need to go to policy. I mean,
All
this, it's a
Going
kind of an
forward, not,
anomaly,
has
yes,
nothing to do
yeah.
with this topic.
I'm
but-
not quite sure. I'll keep thinking about that. I
If you
won't
read that
just-
policy for us and just let us know if there's something that we need to address, I guess get it put on our calendars if there is anything in policy that you feel needs to be changed, which I doubt that there is, but if there is,
I'll
get it
do
on
that.
our agenda, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. And item 26.
Move the board approve change order number 9 to the contract with Van Molen Electric, Inc. for the Fellows Project in the amount of $1,178.11.
Second.
Moved by Espacette, seconded by Briggs. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. Items from the board.
Well, Director Talbot, you stole my thunder, but Jonas, I got the privilege to know Jonas as a parent a long time ago when my oldest was in Northwood, and really appreciated the opportunity to work with you at that time as the school counselor there and helping out with lots of different school activities and things, but then also to move into this role and to work with you professionally. And you are always good about answering all of my questions, and I know sometimes I ask a lot, but you have such a huge heart, and you're so great with kids, and you have such a great vision and ability to look at things and to have sometimes hard conversations, and I've really appreciated all of the times that you've allowed me to ask questions and seek more information from, and I do wish you the best when you head back east. So thank you for your service in the district. We're better because of it. So,
Jonas, the kids of this district will reap the benefits of what you have done for years to come, and I'm saddened that the future kids of this district won't reap the benefits of all the great things you would have done for us if you were staying. So I wish you all the best.
I'd like to add that we're going to miss you and really appreciate the leadership that you've provided to the district in your way. Definitely the staff and students and families in this community are going to really, they're going to miss the things that you've done and the things you would have done for them. Sure we can't talk to the East Coast, really? We understand. All the best of luck.
Jonas, I don't pretend to know why you've made the decision to go home. Family is important, and I can totally understand why you would want to. That being said, I'm going to miss you. I appreciate what you've done, and don't run away too quick when this meeting's over. I'd like to come actually talk to you and shake your hand.
On, I guess, one non-sentimental item, before the meeting tonight, the items that are being reviewed for the early literacy program were on display in the hallway out in front of here. Staff members were there to answer questions. There were a few people from the public that came to review those and look at all the items. Director Franzen and I were available for questions and for our own gathering our own background and knowledge of the items as part of our commitment to the TLC committee. And so if people want to review those, what other steps are there still in place for people to review those, if anything? You know, Dr. Ross?
There's an online opportunity on the website.
Online opportunity on the website? And that'd be, okay. No, look at that, a microphone right there.
Okay. Before we, or any other Anybody else want to jump in here? Anything?
Just
Okay.
wanted to give everyone a heads up that if you want to pass something you know I'm opposed to, the next meeting's the time to do it. I won't be here.
No, okay. Well, Bill might just take you up on that.
Or at a minimum, it's the time to do it without hearing about it.
On that note, I'd like to make a few comments regarding the statement that the president of the board made earlier. I truly appreciate the fact that the policy committee will be moving forward with a review to make sure our district policies and procedures will protect staff, students, and their families' rights and maintain a positive learning environment for our students. This is a timely issue for many in our community regarding federal agents and possibly in our community, and they've been in our state visiting communities. They have been at or near schools throughout the nation, so it is a timely issue. The resolution that I did present, this safe and supportive school resolution, did not seek to establish statutory status like President made mention to. As a matter of fact, our legal counsel for the school district, Drew Braken, gave us a review of it, a brief one at that, but clearly states that the resolution does not declare a sanctuary status for the Ames schools, and there is no intent to infer that with U.S. or interfere, with U.S. immigration or customs enforcement officials. I took great care, actually, of not including sanctuary status language in the resolution, because I didn't want people to overreact to that language that it has, raises the concerns of some people in our communities and the support of others. So, and I have to admit that I could have brought forward resolutions that were specifically, such as Chicago's resolution for their public schools, that said they really did want to present or create a sanctuary status in their schools and protect their students from federal agents from entering their buildings. I did not do that. But I must also disagree with the interpretation that the safe and supportive school resolution that I submitted didn't establish policy. Actually, it did. In the therefore clauses of it, it established specifically what procedures I was recommending that our school staff should follow if authorities came to the door asking for information regarding families, asking to speak to students or their families, or even staff. In addition to that, so those policies were contained in that. Lastly, I really have to admit, I'm most disappointed that my fellow members of the board perceived my resolution as political. It's really a sad statement today that advocating for students in a safe learning environment can be perceived as political or partisan. Yet members of our board haven't perceived other recent resolutions we have passed or communications that we've had recently with legislators during this legislative session in Des Moines when advocating for our students in our district as political. So I'm kind of disappointed in that. But again, I'm going to finish on a positive note that I'm very pleased with what Dr. Taylor is going to talk to us about here in a minute. I just briefly skimmed through it. I haven't looked at it all, but it does look to accomplish the vast majority of what I was intending in my resolution. So, Dr. Taylor, thank you for that.
Any other things from the board? All right, on some staff.
I didn't get it out in front, but I do have copies of that draft policy if there is anyone from the community who'd like to pick one up afterwards. Or Austin, you can have one too after the meeting if you'd like to. Or
There you go. Yeah. Thank you.
if I come up a little short on those and you'd like a copy of those, you can let me know. This particular policy we put together was one, and I say we, involved a lot of research from Dr. Ross, and we also did visit with the Iowa Department of Education to make sure that we were on the right track and what we were doing. It does cover, I think, the main points of not only the policy, which comes in front of the board, but also the administrative rules, which is how we must handle that kind of situation. And when I say quite a bit of research, it does cross-reference the 14th Amendment, and it does cross-reference the Filer Supreme Court case from 1982, which I always found kind of interesting to read from the standpoint that the state of Texas at that point in the Filer case had come to the conclusion that they were not going to provide a free public education for some immigrant students on the basis that they didn't have the money to do it. The Supreme Court said, well, I don't think that's the real problem here. The real problem is you can find a more effective means of dealing with the money part, but when you have young kids who are residents in your district who are under the control of their parents, they would be disadvantaged for an entire lifetime if they were denied a public education, which is the proper approach. Here we are 35 years later, and Filer is still the controlling law today when it comes to all states. So as you run through this, we tried to identify the difference between immigrants and non-immigrant students, and it really is much more simple than you imagine. Immigrant students who are adults and children who come here with the intention of making this country their home. With that being said, they have no intent of returning to their country of origin, and as a result, according to the Supreme Court and the Equal Protection Clause and the decision in the Filer case, schools must at that point provide a free public education for immigrant students. Non-immigrant students are those who are there under a visa, and they are treated much differently. We do not have to provide an education for students that are on a visa. The real difference between non-immigrant and immigrant, besides the visa, is in order to get the visa, they sign a document that says they intend to return to their home country. For all of those particular reasons, it is the belief of the Ames Community School District that immigrant children are persons who can claim the benefit of equal protection. No substantial interest is furthered by discriminating against children who had no control over their parents' conduct, nor their own undocumented status, and would be disadvantaged if denied a public education. I use part of the line from the Supreme Court case in the Filer situation. For those reasons, the Ames Community School District provides students, assuming they meet residency requirements, with tuition-free education. So if you go to what we call the rules, administrative rules, which follows that up, this is how we put things in action and where we relied heavily upon the Department of Education. It's interesting to note that the two things that I think most people are concerned about are, one, how about requests for student records? And it becomes very complicated here from the standpoint that if a local law enforcement, and I want to paraphrase or start to let you know that we have a tremendous, tremendous relationship with the local Ames Police Department. They are our first call for our bomb threats. They have the expertise, and they have swept our buildings numerous times in past years over false bomb threats. They are there when we need them, and I would in no way want to do anything that would destroy or ruin that relationship. But if local law enforcement makes a request, either written or oral, for names and addresses of students, there's really no obligation to comply. the real key here is directory information, and I would tell you of our 8 buildings, 6 do not have a student directory. And keep in mind that once a building creates a student directory, that is a public document. And so when the law enforcement would come and want to take a look at names and addresses of students, if that building has a student directory, we have no choice. Under Iowa law, especially Section 22, which deals with open meetings laws and the Federal Education Rights to Privacy Act, FERPA, than to give those addresses and names of students to our local police. The other thing that I would point out is if it's a subpoena from a state agency, this really gets a little bit more complicated. The district must comply unless there's a court order otherwise. If it's a federal agency, for the most part, if the federal agency subpoenas the school's records, the district's attorney is the one that we contact immediately, and he will make a ruling for us and give us that advice, Bill, and we will certainly listen to attorneys. So there's 3 different situations. Local, we don't have to comply unless they have a directory handy. If it's the state, we must comply. If it's the federal, contact our attorney. What they're going to do is review that subpoena and tell us especially what we need to do. I think the other one that has a lot of fear is that people think that the immigration people will knock down the doors at Ames High School and start dragging students out in the street, and I can assure you that's will not happen. When it comes to access to students, this has been our policy and our practice for as long as I've been in the district. When local police come to our building and say they have a suspicion they would like to talk to a student, we provide them a private room. Either a staff member or an administrator goes and gets the student and brings them to the office. In many cases, I've seen Spence Evans just get on the intercom during a break and ask, well, Tim Taylor, please come to the office as soon as possible. We try not to create, and the agreement with the Ames Police is, we do not want any kind of a disruption of our learning environment when this takes place. In my experience in 25 years in the district, I've had 2 requests from federal agencies to talk to students. And in both of those cases, we got their identification, we got it verified, we even made phone calls to Washington, D.C. to make sure they were who they said they were. And they were compliant also. We said we don't want a disruption. Incidentally, they wanted to talk to a staff member. We don't want a disruption. We have an office space right here. I'll go get the staff member and you can visit with them. So I think as you begin to read this, we have to, for the most part, cooperate with the law enforcement, but we can request the conditions upon which they're meeting with or talking to students. What we again will do in most cases, except for one particular agency, which is DHS. And this may surprise parents to know that we will always contact parents if a staff member, if a student is involved. If DHS is the lone agency, Department of Human Services, if they say do not contact the parent, we may not. So I hope the public understands that that's the lone exception to that. We contact the school's attorney for guidance in almost all of those other situations, and it's just been our practice to comply and make sure that our educational environment isn't disrupted and that our staff and students are treated with dignity through that. So that's the real purpose of this particular addition to policy JEC, which is school admissions, and we'll certainly take some information and advice, feedback, input from board members as we move forward with the attempt to bring this back at our next board meeting. That's a long one, but now we can get to maybe some other items.
Will this have to go through a formal policy committee meeting?
And pardon?
Will this have to go through a formal policy committee meeting?
I'm going to start with you. I'm going to start with you 2 guys first.
Okay,
right?
so we'll have to, and do we have a set date for this policy committee meeting at this time, or do we need to get, that'll just go out in email to get that set as soon as possible? So, because
Yes.
I'm imagining there will be people from the public that will want to
We'd
sit in
like
on
to
this
have this
policy
here by,
committee.
yeah. we'd
Now
like
that
to
we have
bring it
people
back
sitting
by
in on
April
policy
10th,
committee
for
meetings,
sure.
all right. Thank you.
We do have a meeting, I think Dr. Ross and I with Inclusive Ames, a couple representatives in a planning meeting as we move forward in working with Inclusive Ames. And that meeting is tomorrow at 10:30. There's some interesting things coming down the pipe at the legislature. I think this Friday is the final funnel day, and a couple of them that have caught my attention over time. And the one that Director Rosser brought up is the hope that perhaps the 1 cent sales tax will be extended to 2050, which would be very nice. There is some that are a little bit, there's a lot of ambiguity around it, but they're messing around with giving us home rule as opposed to Dillon's rule, but only in certain situations, which I'm really trying to dig into that one to find out what situations are they going to allow us.
Dr. Taylor, that's why I didn't bring it up, because there's so much stuff out there, it's hard to really be specific about it.
That's amazing. I mean, for the audience, Dillon's rule is the one that we have to operate under, and it really says if it doesn't say you can, then you can't. It must specifically say we can do something or we can't do it. Home rule says if you think you want to and it doesn't say you can't, go right ahead. So that's the one that cities and governments operate under. Why? I think obviously they haven't trusted us over the years to have all that power contained in home rule, I hope. There is a limitation also on the Department of Education guidance, even though we just went to that one for this particular policy. There's been some conflict between the Department of Ed and the State Attorney's Office, so they're now going to begin to limit the Department of Ed's opportunity to interpret code and Iowa laws are moving along. I thought those are very, very interesting. I wanted to bring those to the board's attention. We do have tonight, incidentally, and unfortunately it is tonight, 3 high school students who were selected by the Iowa High School Speech Association as outstanding performers. Joe Schonenrock, Libby Gronenwald, and Elena Andrews were all selected, and that means they will be qualifying for an appearance at the All-State Festival, which unfortunately is probably going on right now. And that one happens to be at UNI, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. Ms. Cappy Dobbins, who is the art teacher at Ames Middle School, brought home $1,500 for her art classroom after this week in the youth art for an all-Iowa youth art exhibit, and there were several awards that were received by Ames high school, middle school students, Ames middle school students because of her work. So again, that's always very, very good news. We will be bringing, I hope, forward a superintendent's budget on April 10. To let the board know, we did negotiate last week for nearly 5.5 hours with PPME, which is our custodial maintenance union. We hope to get back to them and try and get that finalized so that we can slap that budget together and bring it forward to you by April 10 for discussion. Besides that, we'll be moving down the line relative to the Facilities Committee and the Phase 1 project, which is coming back from Hala Architecture very, very soon, relative to renovation and new high school information and data only that we can work with. The Mitchell staff will be here to talk about a co-teaching model, I believe, on our April 10th meeting. And we will probably be contacting Bill and setting up a real quick budget audit committee relative to the superintendent's budget sometime before that. So we'll be getting in touch with you on those things. That's kind of the calendar.
We already have one set.
And that is?
April 8th.
Perfect. We're set for April 8th.
That first week in April.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Anything else from staff over there?
All right, I'll take a motion for item 30.
And we'll go into closed session as provided in 21.51J of the Open Meetings Law to discuss the purchase or sale of particular real estate only where premature disclosure could be reasonably expected to increase the price the governmental body would pay for that property or reduce the price the governmental body would receive for that property.
Second.
Moved by Espet, second by Rasmussen. Discussion? Proceed to vote on roll call.
Lewis. Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at somebody. Rosser, aye.
Briggs, aye.
Rasmussen, aye.
Franz and I.
Deirdre, aye.
Talbot, aye.
Esposito, aye.
Passes 7-0. We're in closed session.
We will be
Hello? Okay. That worked okay? Okay. I'll fix that momentarily. Thanks.
We are out of closed session. Take a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Rasmussen. Discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Passes 7-0. We're adjourned.